The moment you reacted. You lost. Not the argument. Not the situation. Not the relationship. You lost. Because the second your emotions took the wheel, the other person won. The situation won. The chaos won. And you were left standing in the wreckage of words you can't take back, decisions you can't undo, and a version of yourself you don't recognize. And the worst part? It happens in less than 3 seconds. I want to ask you something honest. And I want you to sit with it, really sit with it, before you answer. When was the last time you reacted to something and felt proud of how you handled it? Not managed it perfectly. Not handled it like a saint. Just proud. Like you walked away from a difficult moment and thought, that was me at my best. For most people, that memory takes a while to surface. Because most of us have spent years, sometimes decades, being at the mercy of our own emotional reactions. Saying things in anger that carved wounds into people we love. Making decisions from fear that cost us opportunities we deserved. Shutting down in hurt when what the moment needed was our clarity. Exploding when we should have been still. Going silent when we should have spoken. We are not bad people. We are untrained ones. And today, on the Stoic path, that changes. Because what I am about to give you is not a breathing exercise. It is not a toxic positivity script telling you to smile through pain. It is the deep, honest, battle-tested understanding of how your emotional reactions actually work, where they come from, why they hijack you, and most importantly, how you take back the wheel. For good. Stay with me. The anatomy of a reaction. Let's start at the beginning. Because you cannot master something you don't understand. And most people fundamentally misunderstand what a reaction actually is. A reaction is not a feeling. I want to be very clear about this distinction, because confusing the two is the source of enormous suffering and an enormous amount of unnecessary damage in human relationships. A feeling is involuntary. It arrives without your permission. Someone says something cruel and something tightens in your chest. You receive unexpected good news and something lifts in your body before your mind has even processed the words. You walk into a room with a tense atmosphere and something in you registers it before anyone has spoken. Feelings are information. They are your nervous system communicating with you. They are neither good nor bad. They simply are. A reaction, however, is what you do with that feeling in the space before conscious thought engages. It is the snapped response. The slammed door. The passive-aggressive silence. The text sent at midnight that you regret by morning. The tears in a meeting you swore you would hold together. The shutdown that lasts 3 days when what was needed was a 5-minute honest conversation. Reactions are not feelings. Reactions are feelings that have been handed the keys to your behavior without supervision. And unsupervised feelings, however real and valid, are extraordinarily poor drivers. The 3-second window. Here is something that neuroscience has confirmed and that the Stoics understood 2,000 years before brain imaging existed. Between every stimulus and every response, there is a gap. A window. A space. A pause so brief that most people blow through it without ever knowing it existed. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who built an entire philosophy of human freedom from the depths of a Nazi concentration camp, wrote words that have permanently altered how I understand human agency. He said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." 3 seconds. That is approximately how long that window stays open before the emotional brain overrides the thinking brain and the reaction launches. 3 seconds between the trigger and the explosion. 3 seconds between the insult and the response that escalates everything. 3 seconds between the fear and the decision made from it. 3 seconds that most people spend completely unconscious, on autopilot, running old emotional programs installed in childhood, in past relationships, in old wounds that never fully healed. And here is what separates the person who has mastered their emotions from the person who is still being mastered by them. The master has learned to live in that 3-second window. Not perfectly. Not every time. But consistently enough that their reactions become responses. Their explosions become conversations. Their shutdowns become boundaries. Their panic becomes discernment. That window is where your power lives. And we are going to learn how to stand in it. The teacup and the storm. There was a woman named Celeste who had a temper that arrived like weather. Fast. Unpredictable. Total. She didn't consider herself an angry person. Between the storms, she was warm, generous, deeply loving. But something would trigger her, a careless word from her partner, a perceived slight from a colleague, a driver cutting her off in traffic, and within seconds, Celeste was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere loud and hot and completely beyond reason. Afterward, always afterward, came the regret. The apologies. The shame. The exhausted replaying of the moment, asking herself why she couldn't just stop. One evening, her grandmother, a quiet woman of extraordinary composure, handed Celeste a cup of tea. Celeste was mid-storm. Still vibrating from an argument. Still hot with it. Her grandmother said nothing. She simply held out the cup. And Celeste, surprised by the gesture, paused. Reached out. Took the cup. Felt the warmth of it in her hands. By the time she had taken the first sip, something had shifted. Not resolved. Not fixed. But the temperature had dropped just enough for her to breathe. Her grandmother finally spoke. "The storm is real," she said. "I am not asking you to pretend it isn't. But you are not the storm, Celeste. You are the one standing in it. And you can choose, even in the middle of it, whether to spin with it or to stand still." That teacup became Celeste's symbol for the 3-second window. She didn't stop feeling the storms. They still came. They still arrived fast and hot and without warning. But she learned, slowly, imperfectly, consistently, to reach for the cup first. To pause. To breathe. To remember that she was the one standing in the storm. Not the storm itself. What is your teacup? What is the thing, the breath, the physical sensation, the internal phrase, that can interrupt the 3 seconds between trigger and reaction long enough for you to choose who you want to be in this moment? Find it. Practice it. Make it automatic. Because that small interruption is the difference between the life you have been living and the life you are capable of. Why we react, the root beneath the reaction. Now I want to go deeper. Because surface-level emotional management, the kind that tells you to count to 10 and take deep breaths, will only take you so far. Real mastery requires something more uncomfortable. It requires you to ask not just what triggered me, but why did that specific thing trigger me so completely? Because here is the truth that most emotional intelligence content skips over in its rush to give you techniques. The intensity of a reaction is almost never proportional to the present moment. When you react to something with a level of emotion that seems, even to you, larger than the situation warrants, that emotion is not primarily about what just happened. It is about what this moment reminds you of. The partner who cancels plans and triggers a disproportionate wave of hurt, that hurt is not just about tonight's canceled dinner. It is about every time in your history that you felt like you were not worth showing up for. The colleague who dismisses your idea in a meeting and sends you into a spiral of shame, that shame is not just about this morning's meeting. It is about every classroom, every dinner table, every relationship where your voice was treated as irrelevant. The friend who doesn't text back and sends your anxiety into overdrive, that anxiety is not about the unanswered message. It is about the attachment wound that taught you, long ago, that people you love eventually disappear. Reactions are rarely about the present. They are echoes of the past playing through the speakers of the present. And you cannot manage an echo by attacking the speaker. You have to trace it back to its source. And NBSP, the man who always argued. There was a man named Gerald who was brilliant, generous, and almost impossible to disagree with. Not because he was always right, though he often was. But because any disagreement, however gentle, however well-intentioned, would send him into an immediate and total defensive posture. He would argue with the ferocity of someone defending their life, not their opinion. Colleagues learned to stop challenging him. His children learned to stop bringing him their real thoughts. His wife learned to navigate around him rather than through him. Gerald was not a cruel man. But his reactions had built walls around him that intimacy could not penetrate. In his 50s, after his wife told him she felt completely alone in their marriage despite 30 years together, Gerald did something he had never done before. He sat with himself in silence and asked the question he had been running from his entire adult life. Why does being disagreed with feel like being erased? The answer, when it came, was not about his wife. It was not about his colleagues. It was about a father who expressed love through criticism and whose approval Gerald had spent a lifetime trying to earn through the irrefutability of his positions. Every argument Gerald had ever won was really an attempt to finally, permanently, be seen as enough. When he understood that, really understood it, in his body, not just his mind, something shifted. Not overnight. Not completely. But the reactions lost some of their ferocity. Because Gerald had stopped fighting the present and started healing the past. This is the deeper work. Not just interrupting the reaction, but understanding what it is actually about. Because a reaction you understand has far less power over you than one you are simply trying to suppress. The Stoic framework, what is and isn't yours. Now let me bring in the philosophy. Because this is the Stoic path, and the Stoics had something to say about emotional reaction that is so precise, so clear, so devastatingly useful that it has survived 2,000 years and is still more relevant than almost anything written in the last decade. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and emerged as one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, built his entire teaching around a single distinction. Some things are in our control. Some things are not. In our control, our judgments, our intentions, our responses, our values, our inner narrative. Not in our control, other people's behavior, other people's opinions, external events, outcomes, the weather of the world around us. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Because what Epictetus was saying, and what he spent his life teaching, is that the source of virtually all human suffering is the habit of treating things outside our control as if they were inside it. We suffer when someone is rude to us, because we have decided that their behavior has power over our peace. We explode when plans change, because we have decided that the predictability of external events is responsible for our inner stability. We shut down when we are rejected, because we have decided that another person's assessment of us determines our value. In every case, the reaction is not caused by the external event. It is caused by the meaning we assign to the external event. And meaning, this is the radical, liberating, life-changing truth, meaning is in our control. Not the event. But how we interpret it. What we decide it says about us, about others, about the world. That interpretation is where your freedom lives. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world, a man who faced constant threat, betrayal, loss, and pressure that would shatter most people, wrote these words to himself in his private journal. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't writing that for posterity. He was writing it because he needed to hear it. Because even Marcus Aurelius had to remind himself, daily, deliberately, in writing, that his peace was not dependent on the cooperation of the world around him. If the Emperor of Rome had to practice this daily, so do you. So do I. The practice, starting today. I don't want to leave you with just philosophy and story. I want to give you something you can use today. Tonight. In the next difficult moment, whenever it comes. Here is what I call the pause, name, choose practice. It is not complicated. But it is powerful. And it works. Pause. The moment you feel the heat of a reaction rising, pause. Not forever. Just long enough to create a sliver of space between the trigger and the response. Breathe. Feel your feet on the floor. Touch something physical. Do whatever it takes to interrupt the automatic sequence for just a few seconds. This is reaching for the teacup. Name. In that pause, name what you are actually feeling. Not the story about it. Not who is to blame. Just the raw feeling underneath. I am feeling hurt. I am feeling afraid. I am feeling disrespected. I am feeling unseen. Naming a feeling does something neurologically remarkable. It activates the prefrontal cortex, the thinking, reasoning part of your brain, and begins to quiet the amygdala, the alarm system that is driving the reaction. Neuroscientists call this effect labeling. You can call it common sense. You cannot think clearly about something you haven't named. Name it. Choose. Now, and only now, choose your response. Not from the heat. Not from the old wound. Not from the story about what this means and who is to blame and what they deserve to hear. From your values. From the person you actually want to be in this moment. From the version of yourself that, 5 minutes from now, or 5 years from now, you will look back at with respect. What response serves me and this situation best right now? Sometimes the answer is to speak. Calmly, clearly, honestly. Sometimes the answer is to wait. Sometimes the answer is to walk away, not in defeat, but in wisdom. But whatever the answer is, it comes from you. From your conscious, deliberate, value-driven self. Not from the reaction. Not from the wound. Not from the storm. From you. We have looked honestly at what a reaction actually is, and why it is different from a feeling. We have explored the 3-second window where your power lives. We have gone beneath the surface to understand why certain things trigger us so completely. We have brought in one of the most powerful philosophical frameworks ever developed for emotional mastery. And we have given you a practice, simple, concrete, and immediately usable, for beginning to close the gap between trigger and response. But we are only halfway. There is a kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. You know the one. It is not physical exhaustion. It is the exhaustion that comes from spending years, sometimes an entire lifetime, at war with your own emotions. Fighting reactions you don't understand. Cleaning up damage you didn't intend. Apologizing for explosions you swore would never happen again. Carrying the quiet shame of knowing that somewhere inside you, there is a version of yourself that keeps showing up uninvited, loud, reactive, out of control, in the moments that matter most. That tired is real. And it ends here. Not because part 2 contains a magic formula. But because what we are about to do together is finish the work we started. We are going to go to the places most conversations about emotional control are too polite to visit. And we are going to come out the other side with something that actually lasts. Not a technique. A transformation. Let's go. The people who hunt your reactions. I need to talk about something that most emotional intelligence content completely ignores. Not every trigger in your life is accidental. Some people, and I want you to hear this clearly, because recognizing it will change how you navigate certain relationships forever, some people have studied you. They know exactly which buttons to press. They know the specific words, the specific tone, the specific timing that will send you from calm to chaos in under 60 seconds. And they use that knowledge. Not always consciously. Not always with calculated malice. Sometimes it is the unconscious behavior of someone who feels powerless and has learned that destabilizing you gives them a temporary sense of control. Sometimes it is the deeply ingrained pattern of someone who grew up in chaos and only knows how to relate through it. Sometimes, and this is the hardest one to accept, it is someone who genuinely enjoys the power that comes from watching you lose yours. Whatever the motivation, the effect is the same. You react. You lose control. And they win. Let me tell you about a woman named Sandra. Sandra had a colleague, let's call him Marcus, who had an extraordinary talent for saying the one thing, in exactly the right moment, in exactly the right tone, that would send Sandra into a reaction she always regretted. In meetings, in front of others, with surgical precision, Marcus would land a comment that was just dismissive enough, just condescending enough, just perfectly calibrated to Sandra's specific insecurity about being taken seriously, and Sandra would erupt. And every time she erupted, she lost. Not because she was wrong, but because her reaction became the story. Her emotion became the focus. And Marcus walked away looking composed while Sandra looked unstable. One day, a mentor pulled Sandra aside and said something that permanently altered how she operated. Sandra, he is not pressing your buttons. He is pressing buttons you left unattended. The work is not to stop him from pressing them. The work is to rewire the panel. Rewire the panel. This is the difference between defensive emotional management and genuine emotional mastery. Defensive management tries to control the external, to avoid the triggers, to manage the people, to create circumstances that don't provoke the reaction. Genuine mastery goes internal. It finds the buttons and rewires them, one by one, through honest self-examination, through understanding the wound beneath the trigger, through the slow and unglamorous work of becoming someone whose reactions cannot be reliably engineered by someone else's agenda. When you have done that work, truly done it, you become something that reactive people find deeply disorienting. Unmanipulable. Not cold. Not distant. Not closed. Just settled. In a way that no external pressure can fully unsettle. That is the goal. The unshakable tree. There is a type of tree called the bristlecone pine. It grows in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. High altitude. Brutal cold. Relentless wind. Soil so poor that most trees would refuse to take root in it at all. And yet, the bristlecone pine does not just survive in these conditions. It thrives in them. In fact, scientists have discovered something remarkable: the harsher the conditions, the denser and stronger the wood. The wind that batters other trees into collapse actually compresses the bristlecone's grain, making it harder, tighter, more resilient than wood grown in comfort could ever be. The oldest living bristlecone pine is over 5,000 years old. 5,000 years of storms. 5,000 years of wind and cold and pressure. Still standing. Now I want you to think about the storms in your life, the people, the situations, the provocations that have been battering you for years. The ones that have sent you into reactions you regret. The ones that have made you feel weak and out of control and ashamed of yourself. What if those storms are not evidence of your fragility? What if they are the very conditions that, properly engaged with, are compressing your grain? Making you denser. More rooted. More genuinely, durably strong than any comfortable life could have produced. The bristlecone does not fight the wind. It does not resent the wind. It simply stands. Deeply rooted enough that the wind, however fierce, cannot define its direction. That is what protecting your peace actually looks like. Not the absence of storms. But roots deep enough that the storms stop moving you. What protecting your peace actually costs. Let me be honest with you about something. Protecting your peace is not free. I have seen too much content that makes emotional mastery sound like a pleasant journey of self-discovery, all candles and journals and gentle affirmations. And while those things have their place, they are not the full picture. The full picture includes some prices that most people are not prepared to pay. The first price is the loss of certain relationships. When you stop reacting, when you stop being available for chaos, when you stop absorbing other people's emotional dysregulation, when you stop performing the role of the person who always explodes so that someone else doesn't have to, some people will leave. They will not leave quietly. They will call it coldness. They will call it arrogance. They will say you have changed, as if change is a betrayal rather than a survival. Let them go. Not with resentment. Not with satisfaction. but with the clear-eyed understanding that some relationships are only sustained by your reactivity. And a relationship that requires your dysfunction to function is not a relationship worth the cost of staying broken for. The second price is the discomfort of sitting with feelings you used to discharge through reaction. Here is something nobody tells you about stopping the explosion. The feeling doesn't disappear just because the explosion doesn't happen. When you interrupt a reaction, when you pause, when you breathe, when you choose not to say the thing or slam the door or send the text, the emotion is still in your body. And it needs somewhere to go. This is why so many people find the early stages of emotional mastery deeply uncomfortable. Because they have been using reactions as a pressure valve for years. And when the valve is closed, the pressure builds. The answer is not to reopen the valve. The answer is to learn to process the feeling without discharging it onto the nearest person. Write it. Move your body. Speak it to a trusted person. Sit with it in silence and let it complete its cycle without acting on it. This is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. That discomfort is the feeling of your nervous system learning a new way to operate. It is growing pain. And growing pain, unlike damage pain, is worth every moment of its discomfort. The third price is the loss of being right. This one is the subtlest and, for many people, the most difficult. Reactions often feel justified. And sometimes, frequently, in fact, they are. The thing that triggered you was genuinely unfair. The person who provoked you was genuinely out of line. The situation that sent you over the edge was genuinely unjust. You were right. And your reaction cost you anyway. Because here is the brutal truth about emotional mastery that nobody wants to hear. Being right and being effective are not the same thing. You can be completely, objectively, provably right, and still lose every important thing in the situation, because your reaction shifted everyone's focus from the actual issue to your emotional response. The person who stays calm in a conflict does not win because they are right. They win because their composure gives their rightness room to be heard. Protect your peace. Even when you are right. Especially when you are right. The art of responding without explaining. There is a particular habit that reactive people share, and I say this with complete compassion because I have lived it myself. The habit of over-explaining the reaction after it happens. The long text that tries to justify why you said what you said. The conversation that begins as an apology and becomes a defense. The exhausting back and forth of trying to make someone understand why you reacted the way you did, as if understanding will somehow retroactively make the reaction okay. It won't. And more importantly, you don't owe it. Let me say that again because it is one of the most liberating things I can offer you today. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your emotional boundaries. Epictetus said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. And the corollary to that is this: when you have done the work of reclaiming your mind, when you have rewired the panel, when you have learned to stand in the 3-second window, when your peace is genuinely yours and not contingent on anyone else's behavior, you no longer need to explain it. You simply live it. Calmly. Consistently. Without apology. There is a woman I want to tell you about. Her name was Diane. Diane spent the first 40 years of her life being what she described as loud about her feelings. Every emotion was expressed at full volume. Every hurt was announced. Every boundary was explained in exhaustive detail to the very people who had crossed it, as if enough words could produce the understanding that would finally make her feel safe. It never did. At 41, after a particularly painful falling out with someone she loved, Diane made a quiet decision. She was going to stop explaining herself to people who were not listening. Not stop communicating. Not stop being honest. But stop the exhausting, hope-driven practice of handing her inner world to people who consistently mishandled it, and then being devastated when it came back damaged. She started responding instead of reacting. She started setting limits without delivering essays about them. She started letting her behavior communicate what her words had failed to. And something remarkable happened. The people in her life who were capable of genuine relationship, rose to meet her new standard. And the ones who weren't, revealed themselves quickly. And quietly. Without drama. Because there was no reaction left to feed the drama with. Your peace does not need a press conference. Protect it quietly. Live it loudly. What emotional mastery actually looks like. I want to give you a realistic picture of what you are building toward. Because I think too many people abandon the work of emotional mastery because they have an unrealistic image of what the finish line looks like. They think it looks like never feeling anger. Never feeling hurt. Never being triggered. Moving through life in a state of serene, uninterrupted calm, untouched by difficulty, unmoved by pain, a kind of enlightened emotional robot who has transcended the mess of being human. That is not what it looks like. That is not even what it should look like. Emotional mastery does not mean the absence of emotion. It means the presence of choice. The master still feels anger. But the anger becomes information, telling them that a value has been violated, that a limit needs to be drawn, rather than a command that must be immediately obeyed. The master still feels hurt. But the hurt is processed with honesty rather than discharged with aggression. The master still gets triggered. But the trigger activates awareness rather than autopilot. Marcus Aurelius, the man who wrote more beautifully about emotional mastery than almost anyone in human history, was not a man who felt nothing. His meditations are full of honest, raw acknowledgement of frustration, grief, weariness, and the grinding difficulty of staying true to his values under pressure. What made him a master was not that the pressure stopped affecting him. It was that he had built, through years of daily practice, the capacity to choose his response to that pressure, even when choosing was hard. Even when the reaction was right there, ready, justified, easy. He chose anyway. Every day. Imperfectly. Consistently. And that imperfect consistency, that daily, unglamorous, private practice of choosing response over reaction, is what built one of the most disciplined and admired minds in recorded history. It is available to you. Not someday. Starting with the next difficult moment. Which will come. Probably sooner than you'd like. And when it does, you will have the window. The 3 seconds. The pause, the name, the choice. Use it. The final truth. Here is what I want to leave you with. Your peace is not a destination. It is not something you arrive at once and keep forever without effort. It is not a reward for having resolved all your wounds and mastered all your triggers and become the perfectly regulated, unshakable version of yourself. Your peace is a practice. It is the daily, moment-by-moment, imperfect and courageous choice to protect the space between what happens to you and what you do about it. To stand in that window, however briefly, however imperfectly, and remember that you are not the storm. You are the one standing in it. And you get to choose, every single time, whether to spin with it or to stand still. Some days you will stand perfectly still. And you will feel the quiet, deep satisfaction of someone who has genuinely mastered something difficult. Some days the storm will take you. You will react. You will say the thing or send the message or lose the composure you worked so hard to build. And on those days, and this is perhaps the most important thing I will say today, you do not punish yourself into growth. You observe. You understand. You forgive yourself with the same genuine compassion you would offer someone you deeply love. And you begin again. Because beginning again, without shame, without self-flagellation, without the story that one reaction means all the work was wasted, beginning again is not failure. It is the practice. It has always been the practice. Seneca wrote, "Begin at once to live, and count each day as a separate life." Today is a separate life. Yesterday's reaction does not have to be today's identity. Begin again. Right now. Right here. With the next decision. This is what we do here. Every single time. The Stoic path is not a motivational channel. It is not a place for surface-level inspiration that feels good for 20 minutes and then evaporates. It is a place for the real conversation. The deep one. The one that asks something of you. The one that treats you as someone capable of genuine transformation, not just temporary motivation. Every episode we produce is designed to go to the places most content is afraid to go. To sit with the hard truths. To honor the difficulty of being human while also refusing to let that difficulty become an excuse. If that is the community you have been looking for, you have it.